Hello, everyone. This is Better Read Than Dead, and I'm your co-host, Panther.
I'm Rook and
I'm Iotor.
I'm the resident sharkfish from hell fish.
So, tonight we're going to be talking about reforming America. We've heard a lot of talk about patriotic socialism and reform, and some people say that we don't have to throw the whole fucking thing away. We can fix it. We can make America something that we can actually be proud of for once. So we're going to spend about an hour or so struggling over that. Some of us may believe that can happen. Some of us think that's bullshit. As a matter of fact, I think that all of us think that's bullshit. But let's just dig in. So what is reform? Why do communists oppose reform of capitalism? Because, I mean, that would be easy, right? Let's just pass a law here and expropriate this guy and shoot this guy in the head. I mean, that's what they do in China, right? Like if you're a billionaire in China and you mess something up, they just shoot you. But why can't we really do that in the United States or anywhere? Like, why is reform so opposed by communists?
Well, like it's like when you talk about what fascism is, like not ideologically but economically, it's maintenance of capitalism within crisis, right? So like economic reform meant to slow the crisis or the descent or the downhill spiral, or if you want to call it that, is maintenance of capitalism. That is fascism. It's economic reform.
I want to make a distinction here between reform and reformism. I think, communists oppose reformism, like the attempt to sort of change capitalism while still keeping it in place. And I think we can all agree that reformism is bad, but I would disagree that we oppose reform like unequivocally, because I think certainly there are reforms that we might and do support. Things like marriage equality, abortion rights. There's been many cases throughout history that important reforms have been won, and I think it is important for communists to participate in those struggles, even if we don't see that as the end goal. I think.
Oh, absolutely.
I think fighting for particular reforms on a tactical basis can be part of an overall strategy revolution.
Oh yeah, and it should be done. That's not that's not to say that should isolate yourself from any sort of struggle that just people do,
I think one of the best descriptions of this is when Andrew Jackson says that fascism is defined as reform, and he calls Keynesian economics fascism multiple times. But I think the main reason why any
you mean George Jackson?
Yeah,
I was going to say I don't think Andrew Jackson.
Oh my God!
Said anything about fascism.
If somebody decides to shoot me after this, I think actually I'm not going to say that on live.
Stupid cave beast out of the cold hills of Europe. How can you confuse
Shut the fuck up.
George Jackson with the devil of your type, Andrew Jackson?
Listen.
No, apparently you didn't listen because you can't tell the difference between George and Andrew.
What I was trying to get to is that the main reason why Marxists or any dialectical materialist has to oppose or is opposed to the reformist solution is because dialectical materialists believe stuff starts on the material level, that things must be fixed by changing the level of material relations, because the material base is what controls the superstructure, and that in order to actually like keep from reverting back to what it was, we need to establish a socialist control over the material conditions, as opposed to a capitalist one where you keep trying to reform and hold back the capitalist tie.
Let me interject here. Your understanding of base and superstructure is pretty basic. See what I did there? But Maoists, we actually believe that they can actually influence each other. For example, the superstructure can influence the base. That's why the Cultural Revolution happened. But
Right, but one is generally dominant.
yeah, one is generally dominant. But in a socialist society, it's important that we struggle to create socialist elements in the superstructure and combat old capitalist elements or old feudal elements.
Right. Right.
But also the
a
Cultural
dialectical
Revolution didn't
relationship.
take place until there was a material revolution that preceded it. The material basis is ultimately what determined it, right?
Pretty much. But yeah, there were some people in the Black Liberation movement in the 60s and 70s. They were talking about waging a cultural revolution under capitalism, which basically meant just growing an afro and wearing a daishiki. And as Fred Hampton said, political power does not grow from the sleeve of a daishiki. Daishikis do look cool, though.
Right. There needs to be you can't just like replace it with an aesthetic. There has to be the material basis.
Yeah, matter of fact, like that's how Fred Hampton was extremely critical of that type of trend. Because there were a lot of people back in his time, late 60s, that they just thought that Africanizing your name and celebrating Kwanzaa and wearing Afrocentric clothing and growing your hair out into an afro, they thought that that was the revolution. And Comrade Hampton, he was adamant that no, you actually have to pick up a gun, not for its own sake. We're not warlords and bandits, but we actually have to change the material foundations of society. Otherwise, you're going to be calling yourself Molefi Asante under fascism. And he brought up two good examples. Haiti was an entirely black society. There were no white people around at all. It was entirely black ran, and it ended up being a fascist dictatorship under Papa Doc Duvalier and later his son, the aptly named Baby Doc, until they were ran out of the country. So, yeah, you have to change material conditions. Otherwise, you're really not hitting on much. You'll be calling yourself an African name under a fascist dictatorship.
It's just like an internalization of like oppressor mentality. The idea is to be men, but to be men is to be an oppressor.
If you mention that Brazilian dude, I swear to God. All right. So there's a lot of talk about social democracy. It's sort of a slur on the left. Like nobody wants to be called a soak them, right? Nobody wants to be called a social democrat or a democratic socialist, which is literally the exact same thing. So
I mean, I guess other than the people that call themselves that, I guess.
Yeah. So why is it so baseless? Like it seems that Maoists hate people for no reason, but there's generally a reason. And we don't even hate people. We hate ideologies. We despise revisionist and fascist type ideology. So what exactly is the issue with social democracy? Like, why don't we back AOC, Cory Bush, who's from our hometown? Like, why don't you see Maoists with our little green caps on out knocking doors for Cory Bush? Like, why do we oppose that?
Like as a working class person, like what do their policies change for me? Like nothing. I still don't get to choose where I work or my schedule or what I can really do, right? I'm confined by societal pressures. Like I don't have I don't have control over my own labor, so I don't have control over my own life. Like, what is different?
Some people would say in response, your inaction, your refusal to endorse to work for to get Cory Bush reelected, they say that might help contribute to the election of a reactionary candidate. Like, honest question: would you rather have Cory Bush in power, or would you rather have a Josh Hawley in power, or a Donald Trump, or a DeSantis?
I mean, I don't think it really matters to me in the long run.
But in the short run, though,
I mean, in the short run, I guess the
Mm,
kinder face on fascism is best, but
well, we would.
that's
Wait,
because
wait, wait. You would. I don't think we could honestly. We can't in all good faith call Cory Bush a fascist.
no, but the system is
Yeah, the system that she's
it,
unfortunately a part of.
right. Like that's not a judgment, like a character judgment on her. Like she thinks that she can work within a system to change it. I don't.
I don't either. But in the short run, the thing with leftists is that a lot of us are idealists. We think about how stuff should be as opposed to how it actually is. And I look at it like I look at election results every time an election comes around. Millions of people are voting. Of course, less and less people are voting every year. And I'm not saying by any means that we should dedicate our efforts to electoral politics because that should burn you out. But let's be real. More Americans believe that the institutions of this country have validity. And Lenin himself said that there could be no hope for armed struggle for any revolution. And I believe Mao said something similar: in a capitalist imperialist country, until the ruling class cannot rule in the old way, right? So I'm not saying we should pack our Maoism up, but we have to be real. Like, you have millions of Americans that are voting. Now, how many Americans do we think would actually take the idea of waging a protracted people's war to take apart their own country, I might add? See, that's the difference between us and the Filipinos. They're fighting to liberate themselves from capitalism and imperialism, from neocolonialism. Americans, American communists, are fighting to destroy their own country. Now, do we really think that the majority of Americans are ready for that at such a point? At this point right now, no. So we have to be
So
ready.
I think whenever Lenin's talking about that, and the past, I think specifically it's in like in What Is to Be Done and then Left Wing Communism. He's very specifically saying that the use of the vanguard party is a practical means by which to like propagate communism or the communist ideology to people in these more backwards rural areas where elections were still taken seriously and parliamentarianism was respected. So I think like that's fairly different than for us to go out and like canvass for a political candidate that is like completely different than the political party we're pushing. It would be more analogous to if we were to like put a like to put like if one of us were to become a candidate like Huey P. Newton did towards the end of his life, which would probably fail like it did with Huey P. Newton, but but
Well, it did just
regardless,
fail for Eldridge and Bobby. I think Bobby Seale ran for mayor of Oakland, and
really.
yeah, they ran
Oh yeah,
Eldridge.
you're right.
They ran Eldridge Cleaver, who wasn't even old enough to be president. So yeah, you got to be 35 years old to be president.
Mm-hmm.
So that just ended up turning them into a wing of the Democrats. Like, they made connections that way, mainly thanks to the notorious rightist Elaine Brown. Yeah, they ended up basically becoming a wing of the Democrats. They got political clout, and some of their cadres ended up becoming really important in politics. For example, in Chicago, Fred Hampton's comrade Bobby Rush, he's a congressman now, and I believe there's a couple other ex-Panthers who are in Congress. So I mean, from a reformist aspect, the Panthers did very well. But from a revolutionary approach, they kind of dropped the ball. Right? On the other hand, I don't blame them. Like, nobody wants to get shot up by the police and tear gassed. So if you come up in a situation in a party and you see your comrades being shot and killed all around you, being ran out of the country or going to prison for shit that they didn't do for years, yeah, it's pretty easy to be like, you know what? Fuck this. We're not going to win via armed struggle, so we have to do it the other way. Like, you got to keep in mind, they tried that shit. It didn't work.
So what I'd kind of like to point towards here is that both parties or both tendencies of the ruling class are aimed at reinforcing the current system, capitalism and imperialism, settler colonialism, right? And so while fascism, the right wing, the reactionaries are more oriented towards like naked, raw, brutal force, just like increasing suffering and like they're the stick. The so-called left wing, the Democrats, the social democrats, really their purpose, their intended function is to co-opt revolutionary energy and direct it towards reinforcing the current system, right? And so while I think like I think that was Iotor that said it, that it's one thing to like run your own candidates, to like push a communist in the system, but when you get to the point where you are supporting the Democrats, like really you're just reinforcing the system, and so I think that when we talk about like tactical engagement with like reformist actions, like we really have to be conscious of how entangled we are getting with those pitfalls and traps that are set for us to like pull us into that kind of current, because so many historical parties, both in the United States and abroad, have gotten sucked into that reformist trend and are just no longer revolutionary. They become revisionist parties. So I think maybe there's a little bit of leeway there, but we really got to be careful if we do think about engaging.
And to bring it like home for examples of Maoism going awry for this reason, look at what ended up in Nepal after they surrendered to the UN and entered as a parliamentary organization.
Yeah, and I strongly advise comrades listening to this to go check out our People's Voice article. One of our supporters was actually in Nepal a couple months ago and interviewed Comrade Kiran with I cannot remember the name of that formation for the life of me. Communist Party of Nepal Revolutionary Maoist, I believe. And he interviewed Comrade Kiran. And I strongly advise everyone to check that out. We should listen to elders in the struggle and those who have been where we are. Like they've basically run the whole gamut. And thankfully, there are comrades over there who still remember that they are Maoists and that Maoists have to do Maoist shit. So, yeah, pay attention to Nepal. It's very important. Like people say that Maoists never win. Technically, in Nepal, the Maoists won, right? They toppled the king, and they're in government. But their ideological principles, they threw out the window as a consequence of them becoming part of the bourgeois government. Like, and they were talking about this all the way back in the early 2000s. I think Prachanda said that his goal was not to create a communist society. His goal was to create a Switzerland in the Himalayas. So he kind of showed his hand. But that struggle is for the Nepalese people. So when we talk about reforming the state, right? Reforming the United States, making this shit work for everybody. Key thing to remember is Lenin's definition of the state, right? Yeah. So what did Lenin say that the state is for? Like, what is the purpose of a state?
To maintain the conditions of the ruling class and their rule.
Yeah, keep them in power. Like a state is an armed body of men
Well, like the state is the collection of institutions, right? Like, so the state can be, the club that fucking hits you over the head, or the boot on your neck. It can be an education system. It can be a media system, right? Like, all media is propaganda for something or someone, right?
Right. But at the end of the day, all of these institutions are backed by what? Armed force.
Right, exactly.
So yeah, the state
Like, that's ultimately what it comes down to.
Yeah. Lenin said the state is an armed body of men for the interests of one class to dominate and suppress all others. So what is the nature of the American state? I've heard people on the internet basically describe it as about 5 corporations in a trench coat with the Congress. And that's pretty much what it is, right?
Like, I mean, yeah, in a way.
Yeah, it's like 5 corporations in a trench coat with a big Tommy gun, ready to mow
you. I think the American state specifically is really unique, because it's not really just like one nation state. It's a world empire. It's the American state is everywhere, from like Guantanamo Bay to Okinawa. It's everywhere, all over the world. So I think like the American state specifically has to be understood as like an entirely different type of, or like a qualitatively new type of like armed men enforcing specifically the interests of the like international capital everywhere around the world.
Yeah, you can literally go to the middle of the jungle and find a Coca-Cola can. So, yeah, this shithole has left its mark. I know that much. So, we constantly talk about America being a settler colonial country, right? So, what is settler colonialism, and what set of contradictions does it unfold? And most importantly, like, why can't we all just get along? Like, why is there always this racial, religious, ethnic, all these contradictions that sometimes turn violent? So what's the deal with settler colonialism?
I think of settler colonialism as essentially like a type of virus. You have capitalism that at first develops like to this extreme degree that nobody can afford to like buy houses anymore, at least like the old rich people from the feudal system within England, or to buy land. So then they have to go find another part of the world to like wreak and wreak havoc to in order to like get as much money as they can. And then settler colonialism is the transportation of a population from like the main like the heart of the empire to another part of the world to occupy and maintain power over like that population. And the reason why America is so like internally broken all the way down is because there is one population that was brought over because they were the wealthy people from England and other countries, and there was one population that was brought over for the explicit purpose of like building and being like the hyper proletariat slave, like slave labor of the ruling class. And then there's the rest of the people here who were like here before and were gunned down so that they could have a like foundation to build their new freedom project on.
Right. I think if I were to try to like sum up settler colonialism, it's about replacing a native population with like colonialists. Like just in general, as quick as you can be, like by the means of which is usually just like brutal violence, genocide, shit like that.
Yeah, I'd say that settler colonialism is a specific subset of colonialism, right? Like if colonialism is seizing the lands and resources of a native population for the purposes of the expansion of capital, then settler colonialism is that same thing, but where the native population is not just being exploited and enslaved, but like completely replaced, uprooted, and and displaced from the land. So um, in terms of like why is there this contradiction? It's because like this whole the roots of this whole system, the roots of this country go back into like this tremendous injustice, right? Like there's no way around it. Like between the stolen lands, the displacement of the natives, the genocides against them, and the African contradiction, the importation of slaves, the maintenance of this completely like downtrodden population of cheap labor. There's not really any way around it. Like
you know, I had a conversation with my one of my coworkers the other day, and we got to talking like about slavery, stuff like that, and they said that that like every great empire, every great country has had to subdue another group of people, right? Like some people would say that, oh yeah, all this shit was horrible, but there's no use harping on it. Like, yeah, these people were weak and they were conquered by those who were stronger. Of course, that's a horrible way to look at the world. But what do we say to people who say things like that? Yeah, okay.
Honestly, that's kind of just like ideological poison, I think.
yeah,
I mean,
it's kind of just like a canned response that
Yeah,
into people.
I
like
mean,
we're taught like under capitalism, we are products of capitalism, right?
Yes.
So we are taught that like human relationships are only valuable like when we can get something out of them, right? Like if we can't benefit like all the time from a relationship, it's just you just cut them off, right?
I mean,
It makes like the problem with, with capitalism, it makes everything like transactionary. It commodifies everything.
I mean, sometimes you might have to play that game. Like, look at leftists. Do you really think that these people are?
That's the problem, though.
Like,
is playing the game. Like at the very least, you can try to replace like the poison.
to replace the poison, you have to be powerful, and to be powerful, you got to play the game.
Well, I disagree. There's different kinds of power, right? There's reactionary bourgeois power and there's people's power, right? Like we don't want to establish reactionary power. We don't want to establish power in the old way. We want to establish a new kind of power, people's power, and that is fundamentally different. You can't play the game the same.
So what exactly is? How do you define people's power?
People's power comes from the masses. It comes from the bottom up. It's not dominating from the top down. It's literally hundreds, thousands, and hundreds of thousands, and even millions of people who are coordinating their actions together and making their own choices. It's not just power in the hands of a select few.
You think
power in the hands of a privileged class? It's power that is coming up from the dominated class, like in the pursuit of liberation. Like it is something fundamentally different from the kind of power that has previously existed.
So let's unpack that a little bit. Americans are a fiercely individualistic people, regardless of class. So how do we? Okay, you talk about people's power in the abstract, but in the day-to-day reality of Americans, yeah, like you said, the relationships are transactional. Like we've been out on a Sika to do Sika and other stuff like that. Like people immediately think that we're trying to sell them something, right? And in a way, we are. Ideology. Like we're not just going out for the goodness of our hearts because oh well, it's a nice day. Let's go out and talk to random people. No, we have a goal in mind, right? We want to recruit people for revolutionary organizations. That's a transactional relationship. So
I mean, that's not exactly my goal when I talk to people about things.
where's your goal?
Well,
My goal.
and like
No, go ahead, Fish.
I was gonna say, like whose interests are we acting in? Like we aren't getting power for power's sake. We're not trying to aggregate more and more control into our own hands. We're trying to organize the people in order for them to act on their own behalf. Like we're not trying to get them to do something for us. We're trying to get them to do something for themselves. We're trying to enable them to take action for their own sake.
You are trying
Right.
to get them to do something to you. You want to help found something called a party, which is basically a small group of people, and then you want to build.
Not necessarily though. Like,
Yeah,
I think our goal currently, right, is the like promulgation and popularization of at the very least like some sort of like communal idea, right, where like individualism is, I think it's a fantasy that will evaporate as soon as the pressures like make it so, right? Like as soon as all this like as soon as everything collapses, the ridiculous food chain like the distribution chain that capitalism has built, at the moment that collapses, like all of these ideas of like being able to just like stay alone and be isolated are going to evaporate like spit on a hot sidewalk.
I mean, we've seen shit like that happen before during Hurricane Katrina, and I didn't see much. I didn't see much communal banding together. I did see a whole bunch of people with guns shooting at other people with guns and looting Walmart.
There also wasn't any active communist presence in Katrina. I think it's really contingent upon like how much you set up, like mutual aid networks and like community response programs and stuff, so to like help people get through this. And then after you have that type of stuff wreck through your neighborhood, you can point their anger at the oil companies that are the cause of it, and you can sort of you can get them to realize their interest in it.
Bruh, people want to eat.
Bruh.
People want to loot. People don't want to hear all that shit. Not in like a disaster.
I mean, let's look at the history of labor organization. I mean, like the strongest unions, the strongest tenant unions, always came from desperation. It's collective power is a form of power, and it is. I mean, all power is collective, but people like the masses oftentimes can't get individual power. They can only form collective power, and we are fastly, very, very quickly coming upon a time where we're going to be so disempowered that our only chance for survival is going to be to unite collectively. I mean, I think that tenants unions, labor unions, we're not forming these things so that we can get our communist brownie points. Like, we're doing this because we need to, or we're going to be out on the street. Like, it is something that is an absolute necessity. And I agree with Rook's point that as the situation becomes more desperate, these ideas that you don't need anyone else but yourself are just going to be unfeasible. They're not going to be compatible with the reality that people are living in.
With survival.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I suppose we'll see. I mean, I've studied like societal collapse and stuff like that, and in some instances, yeah, that's true. But
yeah, you haven't lived through it.
In a lot of other instances,
like we can study societal collapse all we want, but like being in the shit is a totally different thing. And like the thing is, you were talking about like people just going just looting and all that kind of shit. Like, well, yeah, they're not equipped with the communal power needed for them to
we're talking about Americans. Right? Americans will take one TV over communal power.
But Yeah, but it's ideological. Like, that's the thing.
No, it's material. They want the TV. They can't eat communal power. That's material.
Well, you can't eat a
They can't
TV
eat
either.
a
I mean,
fucking TV either.
You can sell the TV and get something to eat.
Or
but
you can
what's better
fucking
is to
try to,
have
like,
a union and be able to like make enough money to survive at your job, or to have a mutual aid network and be able to depend on your neighbors when you need them. Like,
gardens.
these are material needs that are being met. And
a mutual aid network, somebody comes and drops a bag of groceries at your door. Oh, wow.
No, equipping people with the knowledge of how to run, like, subsistence gardens. like, because it like, at this point, it sounds so fucking doomsday, like doomer or whatever, but like, I feel like it's gonna get real bad. It's just gonna collapse.
It's already real bad.
That's what I'm. But no, I'm saying. No, I mean, like, how much are we affected as like people in the metropole? Like, food is more expensive, gas is more expensive, right? Like, some of us deal with poverty, right? Like
All
trying to figure out what, like,
not some of us, all you motherfuckers is broke.
Exactly. So like when you're living paycheck to paycheck, like, it's hard to. Oh my god, I lost my place.
I'm sorry, did I distract you?
Yes.
I'm gonna jump in then. I'm gonna take the opportunity.
Yeah,
I have a question for you, Panther. If you're so cynical about the potential for collective action, if you have no faith in the masses, then why are you a Maoist?
I do have faith in the masses. I just don't think that the masses are ready to build communal networks at this point. Everybody's out for themselves. And yes, I am a cynic.
Certainly, they're not ready, but our job is to get them there, right?
Yeah.
Why the hell do you think I'm still here?
But I don't.
This was a fun and useless conversation.
Oh my god! We're just talking in circles. So I feel that you're just being a little contrarian.
Not contrarian. I am a cynic. I am a cynic.
But like faux contrarianism. It's like, I agree with you, but I'm not. I don't like it.
I mean, like, yeah, I'm a cynic. I'm a black person in America. We're born cynics. Nothing good has ever happened to us. But
I feel that's like an affliction, though.
It's not an affliction. It's material reality. We were fucking slaves.
But yeah. What makes it?
Material reality is the cause of affliction.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah. Like what? Yeah. Just because like, or like, take for example, like, feelings. Just because feelings are feelings doesn't mean it's not like material reality.
Nobody gives a shit about black people's feelings in America. Let's move on to the next question. But seriously though, I would call myself more of a pragmatist than a realist. Like, you all are very, very idealistic. Like, you all talk about in the fucking clouds. Like, I always try to bring shit back down to how the average American feels about things. That's why I mentioned Katrina. Like, yeah, in many cases we did see solidarity and the masses of neighborhoods coming together to help each other, particularly elders and children. I think one dude stole a school bus and drove it all the way to Houston. But like, especially y'all's people, white Americans, I don't really see the majority of this country at this point agreeing to that sort of communal
what
that sort of
let me tell you a little story. Okay, when I first moved to St. Louis, I was living out of the back of my truck.
I remember.
I didn't have a job.
I remember.
I was very desperate. I would not have made it. I would not be here on this podcast today if it were not for the support of the masses. I had people who were giving me food, giving me a place to stay,
I remember.
helping me get my paperwork in order. Like I had people who supported me, and I'll never forget. Like the masses. I think that you ought to have more faith in the masses, because while they can be very cynical, while
Assholes.
they can be very set in their ways and individualistic, like the, they do want what's best in the world. They do want to be human to one another, and it's capitalism that strips that humanity away from them. So I think that when push comes to shove, when things really get desperate, we really do have to just put our faith in the masses that they're going to do what's in their own best interest. I think ideology is very powerful, but material reality is even more powerful. So we
I
still
think
have to see how it plays out. But I think that the masses will do what's in their own best interest when it comes time.
I think we have to like actually take a material analysis of how all this relates to the fact that we are in a settler colonial nation. Because like obviously, we've all read Settlers. We all know that the reason why Americans were so absurdly reactionary is because the profit, or like the capital, profit, value, wealth, whatever, that was expropriated from the colonies was used as sort of like little bribes of higher wages, more political
Little
economic
bribes.
reforms. What?
I said not little
Okay.
bribes. Shit, white
All
people
right.
basically cleaned up. Like you say, yeah. Let's go back to settlers for a minute. Like Sakai talks about how the United States, what would become the United States, the British colonies, basically imported a proletariat. My ancestors, right? So they
Yeah.
imported their own proletariat. So black people have always been the real proletariat in this country, along with our Mexicano comrades in the Southwest and our Asian brothers on the West Coast. So some people
I
say
know.
there's no settler proletariat. I think that's ridiculous. There have been proletarianized settlers, but in a settler colonial country, at the beginning, there is no proletariat. That's
What I'm
from the settler class.
what I'm like trying to get.
Like in South Africa, the proletariat is black people. In Israel, the proletariat is Palestinians. So that's probably one of the defining characteristics of settler colonialism.
What I was going to say is like you're totally right. At the beginning, there was not a white proletariat. That's why, historically speaking, we've seen so much reactionary shift from the American quote unquote white proletariat. And even if they were proletarianized, they had this illusion of the American dream, of this like thing they could eventually become if they chased. But I think that neoliberalism combined with neoliberalism mainly, like everybody's wages being lower, has started to dissolve the material reality of like a major or like this labor aristocracy that like Sakai is talking about. Like I still think that white people have it better, and I still think that people in the metropole obviously have it like fathoms better. But I think that between neoliberalism and like all the things that are going to be getting worse as like ecological degradation, I think that we're going to see real desperation from the American white working class that we have not seen in a very long time. And I think that I think it's correct that that where we've come from, it has obviously been the case that the white working class has been principally reactionary. But I think we're entering into the phase where for the white working class's own survival, they must become a progressive revolutionary force. And our goal is like, what?
Not necessarily. Do you remember what happened in Germany?
In Germany, they didn't have climate disaster.
It doesn't matter. Like, okay, most of these people, for one, don't even believe climate change is a thing. And then, like, second,
it won't matter when their fucking houses are consumed by the sea.
And then, second of all, like, just because shit is horrible, that doesn't necessarily mean or lead to somebody becoming progressive or revolutionary. Matter of fact, with settlers, it leads to them becoming more reactionary. For example, when the ANC took over in South Africa, the Boers, the white people down there, the descendants of the Dutch settlers, they were like, oh, yeah, we're going to be friends with all the blocks now. No, they made up shit like the AWB, and they started doing terrorist attacks. So while a certain number might become progressive, might even become communists, I'd say that more are at the risk of becoming fascists. Because when somebody has something and you take it away from them, they're going to be pissed. And they're going to probably blame the communists, or they're going to blame black people, or they're going to blame Mexicans, or some other group that's put up in front of them as a scapegoat, and they're going to start attacking that group. That doesn't necessarily mean that just because they're suffering, they're going to be revolutionaries. I really don't know why people keep believing that, because that has never, ever been shown anywhere in American history. Where
I don't believe that it just is the case. I think that through our action, we can determine like people's consciousness to be towards socialism as opposed to barbarism. I don't think that anything is going to naturally unfold, but I think that there's a route of action that can deliver us with a significantly higher probability into socialism as opposed to barbarism.
What action?
Right.
I don't
right.
see
It's not like it's not getting into this circle of certainty where like if A plus B, then white people will like communism. It's not that.
The main thing that gets white people liking communism is other white people talking to them about communism. Like I keep asking this question over and over and over again. Like, why are white communists insistent on bunching up in these gentrified ass neighborhoods and not going out? Like, are you all allergic to your own people or something? Like, why are you all not working in the trailer parks? Or why are you all not in Appalachia? Like, you all constantly talk about how horrible.
I don't know. I kind of just like fell into where I am.
No,
yeah. I think that's like, sorry, I didn't just speak over you, bro.
It's just like I didn't move here to become an organizer. No, I just ended up here.
You were drafted into the revolution.
But like, but also like where I grew up, like I don't think it would have been good for me to stay there.
So you put your own personal safety over the future of your people, basically.
Hold up, let's like
hold on. So no, like I moved places with my mom. Like what do you mean? Like
no,
it's not.
I've come across a lot of white people like yourself from rural areas. Like, it's unsafe for me as a queer person. Right, everywhere in this country is unsafe for you as a queer person. Like, there is no magical queer utopia that you could go.
Yeah, it's a horrifying realization when you figure that out.
So why don't y'all organize in the communities that you all come from?
Okay, as somebody who is organizing a union in their hometown, I think the more productive way for us to like frame this is that you can actually sort of use your hometown connections to sort of start like forming a connection between a more progressive and a more like backward area. Where I come from, or where I'm born, is an extremely reactionary place. Every night when I take a walk, I see multiple like Trump, Duck Biden, Blue Lives Matter flags, stuff like that. Whenever I go throughout the store, I see people who have threatened me before, and I smile at them. I'm in a very reactionary area, but also then I go to school in a significantly more progressive area where there already was a socialist organization. And what I've basically done is sort of like unite a chapter of the mass organization that we formed on that campus and unite it with the mass organization in my local hometown, so that we're building up, we have enough progressive people who can come down and meet a handful of locals, that we have actual manpower to start like organizing in these areas. Because it's not impossible for white people to be like revolutionary. Like, there literally was like the Battle of Blair Mountain. I have a comrade who's in like that area where that happened, who's like, they all just got like flooded out and shit. And I think that like they seem to think, or I think from like them and some of their more progressive friends in the area, I think that there is a real chance that like these old coal areas can like still be reached. I think like there's been, Reaganomics, there's been the McCarthyism, there's been this mass like brainwashing programming, but that's not like a permanent thing. We are Marxists. We believe all things are rooted in the material world and are like liquid and moving. The like way that current white psychology is formed can be deconstructed and reconstructed in a different way. And I think that we have the capacity to do that.
Bingo. Like, you've basically laid out an organizing strategy for settlers. Thank you, Comrade Iotor. Like,
anytime, it only took me like a decade.
like when you have ties to these areas, you have family there, you've got friends there, you went to school there. That's far better than running away to some urban area where you think that, oh, at least I won't be jumped. Like, if you're a communist, you better be ready to get jumped, okay? So,
That being said, I'm also a heterosexual and I'm a white guy. And I also was literally an MMA fighter before, or like going into MMA fighting before
all right,
medical
stop
stuff.
blowing smoke up your own ass.
So
I'm
yeah,
not blowing smoke
so
on my
yeah,
ass. I'm
so
saying that
cool.
I'm safe in this area.
Yeah, exactly.
We were talking about America being a settler colonial country and why everybody can't just get along. When you have a settler colonial country, you have a different set of antagonistic contradictions, right? If you have one segment of the population that was literally imported to be the proletariat and is steadily treated like shit for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, isn't that a little bit of an antagonistic contradiction? Isn't that a sort of antagonistic contradiction that will be allowed to fester and will rip a country apart? Yes? No?
Well, yeah, I would
Fucking
say that
totally.
the settler colonial contradiction is at the base of everything else in American society.
The primary
There's no way around it.
The primary
Um,
contradiction.
And so like you have to pick a side. Like, are you for settler colonialism or are you against it? Like, and that's where there can be no compromise. There can be no patriotic socialism in a settler colonial country, because if you are for this country, then you are against communism. So there's you have to pick a side. Are you against
No.
settler colonialism or are you for it?
So how do we get
I think
the majority of Americans to be against their country? Because most Americans are actually quite fond of this shithole, believe it or not.
that younger Americans.
I can't understand. I can't understand why, based on my own experience. Like, I joined the army, right? The army fucked, right? Like, I became disillusioned with the army very quickly. When I got out of the army, I started a shit job, and I felt like I was getting ground into dust. Like, I hate this place, right? Like, I didn't become a communist because I just had like these hot, lofty ideals and I love the world and I want to do it right. It's because I was getting fucked and I hated it. And I think a lot of people can resonate with that experience. I think that things are very bad, and a lot of people know that they're very bad. And there's a lot of ideological reasons that people's perception of why they are very bad is distorted and blamed on scapegoats, on immigrants or queer people or Black people. And we need to struggle through that ideology. But I think everyone knows that we're getting fucked, and people can be reached through that.
Yeah, I agree. All right, next question. Difference between progressive and social democratic struggles of the masses for things such as socialized healthcare, demilitarization, etc., versus the idea of transforming settler colonial institutions into revolutionary things. So basically, in layman's terms, should we be involved in progressive, objectively progressive struggles? Like progressive healthcare, socialized healthcare is not a bad thing, right? Nor is demilitarization, nor is opposition to the capitalist death penalty. In all of these things, like these are good things, right? Good reforms.
Yeah.
So how do we?
The way that I think of it is that you can like one thing actually literally has the capacity to make some type of changes with like protests and stuff, advocating for reforms. More important, or not mostly more importantly, but like the other thing that does is that builds up like your connection with the masses when you're at these protests and you're going through and pushing for these reforms. The thing that like actually you run into an issue with is whenever you start to like either endorse individuals within an election or like endorse a political party that's reformist, or even to enter yourself into it, because once you enter into politics, you start being like controlled more and more by like rules of electoral politics and less by like the revolutionary. So I think that it's good to be like defund the police, free Palestine, healthcare, but I think it's bad to enter into the the electoral system.
Yeah, the thing is, like, we have to constantly explain to people that this stuff is never going to happen if we don't struggle for socialism. Like, it is against the root interests of the capitalist imperialist class that owns this country, not just runs it, owns it, to stop doing these bad things. They profit from the death penalty. They profit from Israeli abuse of the Palestinian people. They profit from private prisons. They profit from the police who defend their profits. So involvement in these struggles, and when they inevitably get fucked, as Comrade Fish so eloquently put it, when they inevitably get fucked over, we were there with them from the beginning to say, hey, yeah, we were with you in this struggle, but here's why it failed. There's no way in the world that you're going to take down a multi-billion, going on trillion-dollar pharmaceutical industry with a protest sign and a moral appeal. That's why I shake my head at these leftists that keep doing the same shit over and over and over and over again. Like, okay, you show up at the fucking pharmaceutical company CEO's house with a sign, or maybe you piss on his lawn. Whoop-de-fucking-do. This man is worth $30 billion. You're not doing anything to him. So a different approach is needed, a revolutionary approach, right? So is there anything that we want to wrap up with?
I would say that, like, there is no such thing as patriotic socialism in the United States, right? Like, that is an outright reactionary tendency. I equate it with, like, National Bolshevism, Strasserism. It is in the service of reaction, and we should have no tolerance. What the fuck is
National Bolshevism?
It didn't used to be a thing, and then people made it a thing, and it sucks.
Some people just making up shit now and killing each other.
I think Alexander Dugin was behind it.
So people are just making up shit now and killing each other over these bullshit ideologies. And I've heard of Nazbols.
But that's it.
Nazbol is short for National Bullshit.
Yeah.
Oh, gross. Oh boy.
Yeah.
I think
make me fucking sick.
I think it's important that people understand, like, also the distinction between like what patriotic socialism would be in America versus, like, you know, the patriotism of people like Ho Chi Minh and Chairman Mao Zedong, or not chairman, but, you know,
those were countries. Those were oppressed countries. America is
that's what I was going, like, in the direction of stating that a country that's at the bottom of the boot asserting its national identity is an act of, like, resistance to the capitalist force, but asserting the existence of the dominating country is only buttressing, like, capitalist force.
I'd like,
and in particular, you know, it's not just oppressor versus oppressed country. I mean, that's a large part of it. But, you know, British communists, while they may oppose British imperialism, could still have some kind of pride in their British history without it being. Well, I'm serious. Like they have a history on that island. They have a nation. The British people are a nation. Well, English people are a nation. Scottish people are a nation. Welsh. So my point is that the United States is not a nation. It is a prison house of nations. It is an abomination. Like, it should not exist. And so while you could say that, you know, under certain circumstances, a Scottish socialism could exist, there can never ever be an American socialism. America is anathema to socialism. It is impossible, and we should oppose any attempts to make such a thing.
I think we could take that a bit further and say that no European socialism can exist. Like, you're talking about British socialism. What the fuck? Like, they spend most of their existence as a nation beating up on other people.
And do you understand what I mean, though? Is like they have a national history. The United States is not a real nation. It is rotten to its core. There's no possible expression of American nationalism that is revolutionary. Yeah. The issue for me is that the United States has been settler colonial from its inception. There's never been a real American nation. whereas the Franks, the Celts, the Scots, the Greeks, like those are actual nations that go back to before capitalism, to before colonialism. The United States is not and never will have that basis.
But all of those people had empires, though. The
Sure,
Franks,
they had empire. I mean, the Chinese had an empire, and they
yeah,
had
the Franks,
socialism.
the Romans. Basically, okay.
I'm saying that they are a nation by the communist definition of a nation, and the United States is not, and that is why there can be no revolutionary American nationalism.
I just warn you, most Americans would disagree with you heartily. I guess that's why communists are forever fringe. But I digress. Anybody else? All right. And I don't have a flowery ending. I would just like to say, as Brother Malcolm did, that I am a communist and a revolutionary because I am not an American. I never was an American. We were basically absorbed into this country after the Civil War. They never offered us a choice. Hey, we know we fucked you over, but do you guys want to be Americans with all of the privileges? We've never had shit out of this country. So since it's never offered me and my people anything, I think it should be destroyed. It's a vengeance thing. This has been Better Read Than Dead. We've been your co-hosts. See you next week.